Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We've got a really compelling one for you today. We're going to explore how the District of Columbia is doing something incredibly impactful. They are actively working to transform a brief jail stay into a literal launchpad for community re-entry. We're going to dive right into the frameworks they use to make absolutely sure that the time a person spends inside actually translates to real, tangible success on the outside.
So consider this for a second. What actually happens when a jail sentence is just a quick stop before returning home? When we think of incarceration, we almost always picture these long, sprawling decades spent away from society. But for many people in the local DC system, the reality is completely different. We're talking about a very crucial, super rapid window of time before a detainee goes straight back to their own neighborhood. So the really big question we're tackling today is, how do you maximize that short window?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. First, we'll look at the re-entry bridge. Then, number 2, the DC Doc Toolkit. Third, we'll cover the roadblocks to re-entry. And finally, number 4, the public safety payoff.
Section 1, the re-entry bridge. We're talking about shifting the perception of incarceration, because the mission here actually goes way beyond basic confinement.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between traditional incarceration and the DC system. Traditional models rely heavily on these massive, sprawling state prison networks. They're built for long-term stays, and they're usually geographically isolated from the actual communities these inmates come from. But the DC jail system, it's fundamentally different. It is entirely focused on a local population. It deals heavily with short-term stabilization and is intensely focused on rapid re-entry. Because Washington, D.C. functions uniquely as a district, its correctional system is centered on a local jail reality. And honestly, that completely changes how rehabilitation has to be approached.
Right, so because of this unique setup, the official stance is that incarceration is not a dead end. Instead, it's a critical bridge. Think about it. Many of the residents in D.C. care are pretrial detainees, or they're serving short misdemeanor sentences. We're talking maybe 30 to 90 days. They are going back home, and they're going back soon. So these brief interventions are absolutely high-stakes bridges back to society. The goal is to take that super concentrated window and use it to build confidence, bump up their employability, and start knocking down the barriers that usually haunt a person after they've been locked up.
Moving on to Section 2, the DC Doc Toolkit. Practical, modular, and extremely focused. Let's look at the exact tools they use in such a tight time frame.
To build this bridge quickly, the DC DOC uses what is essentially a Swiss Army knife for rapid re-entry. We're talking GED prep and adult education, basic life skills and conflict resolution, heavy, hands-on mentoring and case management. Plus, there's the RSAT program, which specifically blends substance abuse treatment with vocational education. Now, to be clear, this is not your traditional multi-year trade school. There just isn't time for that. Instead, this holistic approach is engineered for rapid, practical deployment. It's all about job readiness, workplace behavior, and those fundamental habits you need to succeed the very minute you walk out the door.
And this bridge metaphor plays out across the person's timeline in 3 very distinct steps. Step 1 is in-facility preparation. That's the internal work, building soft skills and basic readiness while inside. Step 2 shifts to community pathways. The DOC maintains a work release program, which means they are actively connecting residents to vocational providers outside the walls. And finally, Step 3 is job search and employment. This is driven by structured reentry planning that kicks off well before release. It's basically a continuous chain, linking that internal preparation directly to real external opportunities.
Which brings us to Section 3, roadblocks to reentry, navigating the hurdles of short-term stays. Because, while this toolkit is incredibly strong, there are very real-world roadblocks to overcome here.
These abstract challenges translate into concrete realities on the ground. First off, short stays severely limit the ability to provide multi-month technical training. You just can't do a 6-month course in 60 days. Second, the diverse legal status of the population means programs absolutely require incredibly flexible release timelines. Third, these folks are returning to a highly competitive urban labor market. Any training must align perfectly with real, immediate local hiring demands, things like hospitality, construction, and basic admin roles. And finally, continuity of care. A program started inside is completely useless if it's just dropped upon release. It demands robust post-release support just to do the basics, like securing ID documents and applying for jobs.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why education has to be paired with intensive case management. Job training is just one vital piece of a much larger puzzle. Training alone doesn't solve housing instability, it definitely doesn't cure mental health needs, it doesn't treat substance use, and it certainly doesn't magically erase record-based hiring barriers. Job training is crucial, for sure, but it is part of a complex re-entry ecosystem. The absolute best outcomes rely on all of these factors being addressed at the exact same time.
Let's zoom out for Section 4, the public safety payoff, why this matters directly to your neighborhood.
The core philosophy driving this entire approach is actually pretty simple. Employment is one of the absolute strongest stabilizers after incarceration. When you teach someone how to keep a daily schedule, how to effectively communicate with their supervisors, and how to just manage their day-to-day responsibilities, you are directly cutting down the cycles that lead right back to custody. People with a clear sense of how to find and keep work are just vastly better positioned to succeed.
And you know, this steady, realistic approach isn't just a favor to one person. It ripples out. It leads to increased neighborhood stability right where you live. It facilitates greater family reunification. It creates active workforce participation, which, frankly, the local economy desperately needs. But most importantly, it results in a direct reduction in recidivism. This makes it a fundamental public safety strategy for all of DC. When individuals succeed in reentry, the whole community is safer. I want to read a powerful quote directly from the source material we've been analyzing today. It says, "For people in DC jail, that combination can make the difference between returning to custody and returning to the community with a real plan. And that right there is the ultimate goal. It's not about being flashy. It is about providing a real, actionable plan through a really careful combination of education, treatment, and work release." So I'm going to leave you with this final, impactful question to think about. When that brief jail stay is over, will they return to custody or return to the community ready to contribute? The DC Department of Corrections is building the bridge to make sure it's the latter. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Explainer, and we will see you next time.